Welcome to this explainer. Go ahead and pull up a chair. Let's sit down by the fire for a little bit and demystify the global economy. You know, you hear folks on the news using these incredibly complicated words to describe financial markets, and honestly, it can sound like a completely foreign language. But today, I want to show you that underneath all that intimidating jargon, the economy is actually a very simple, predictable machine. And the best part? It's driven by the most relatable thing in the world, human nature. Okay, let's dive right into this. The economy might seem like this giant, untamable beast, but it's really just a simple mechanical engine. It operates on a few basic parts, repeating the exact same actions millions, actually billions of times a day. And once you see those simple parts moving, I promise you the whole complex machine starts to make perfect sense. So, part one, this simple building blocks. These are literally the fundamental gears of the machine. To understand the whole engine, we have to start at the very bottom with just a single transaction. Think about your day so far. Every single time you buy a cup of coffee, put gas in your car, or pay for your streaming service, you're creating a transaction. You're exchanging money or credit for goods, services, or financial assets. The entire global economy, in all its vastness, is literally just a zillion of these simple transactions happening over and over again. If you can understand a basic transaction, you can understand the whole economy. Now, here's where it gets really fascinating. Credit. It's the biggest and most volatile part of the economy, and yet it's the part people misunderstand the absolute most. Credit is essentially just a way of pulling your future spending forward. When you borrow, you aren't just getting free cash. You are literally borrowing from your future self. You're creating a time in the future where you will actually have to spend less than you make in order to pay it back. Let me explain the difference with a little everyday wisdom. Think of it like this. Buying a beer with cash settles the transaction instantly, right? You hand over the cash, you get the beer, boom, you're done. But using credit is like starting a bar tab with the bartender. You get the beer right now, but you promise to pay later. You and the bartender have just created an asset and a liability completely out of thin air. And the truth is, most of what people call money in our modern world is actually just bar tabs. It's credit. Moving on to section 2, the rhythm of cycles. Let's look at how borrowing creates momentum. Because we can start these bar tabs, we can consume more than we currently produce. And that sets a very mechanical, highly predictable series of events into motion. The absolutely crucial point here is that one person's spending is another person's income. Let that sink in for a second. When you spend more, someone else's income rises. And when their income rises, well, lenders are suddenly much more willing to lend the money because they look like a safer bet. So they borrow more, which means they spend more, which then becomes someone else's income. It's this beautiful self-reinforcing cycle that drives economic growth. As this borrowing and spending pattern speeds up, it creates what we call the short-term debt cycle. Institutions like the National Bureau of Economic Research track these cycles very, very closely. They watch the economy expand, hit a peak, contract into a recession, bottom out at a trough, and then begin the whole dance all over again. Usually, this entire rhythm takes about 5 to 8 years to play out. Which brings us to section 3, the heavy debt burden, the mechanics behind the long-term cycle. Human nature is tricky, isn't it? We have this persistent tendency to push the limits. We absolutely love to borrow and spend during the good times, but we aren't exactly fond of paying down our debts when we probably should. Over decades, this human habit creates a much larger, heavier cycle, the long-term debt cycle. For 50 or even 100 years, debt burdens slowly build up. Incomes are rising, so the debts feel totally manageable, until one day they aren't. Eventually, debt repayments start growing faster than incomes. We saw this exact mechanical process peak and crack globally in 1929, over in Japan in 1989, and again across the entire world in 2008. When the debt gets just too heavy, the economy enters a painful phase known as a deleveraging. Now, in a deleveraging, interest rates usually hit zero, so central banks can't just lower rates to save the day like they normally would. So how do we fix this massive debt burden? Policymakers basically have 4 historical levers they can pull. First, they cut spending, which is painful and deflationary. Second, they reduce debt through defaults. Third, they redistribute wealth through taxes. And finally, the central bank prints new money, which is inflationary. I know the word deleveraging sounds terrifying, but it actually doesn't have to be a disaster. If policymakers carefully balance those painful deflationary forces, like cutting spending, with these stimulative inflationary forces, like printing money, they can engineer what's called a beautiful deleveraging. When that happens, economic stability is restored safely and harmoniously. All right, section 4, when prices heat up. Let's look at the mechanics of inflation and wages. But perfect balance is really hard to achieve. What happens when the engine runs a little too hot? What happens when all that spending, fueled by credit and printed money, outpaces our physical ability to actually create the goods and services people want to buy? Well, that's when we hit inflation. It's a remarkably simple equation. If the amount of money and credit trying to buy things grows much faster than the actual production of those things, prices simply have to go up. And a hugely important piece of this inflation puzzle is how rising wages eventually trickle down to the prices you and I pay at the store. Recent working papers from the Bank for International Settlements actually shed some fascinating light on this. They found that, on average, about 50% of wage increases pass through to consumer prices over a 3-year period. But here's the catch. It's not uniform across the board. Think about it this way. Rising wages impact your local hair salon much more intensely and take much longer to fully unfold than they impact a highly automated car factory. In the private services sector, human labor is the main ingredient, so higher wages hit those prices much, much harder. And what you should really take away from this is that researchers noted since the events of 2020, structural changes, things like supply chain shocks and shifting international competition, have fundamentally altered how fiercely these wage hikes fuel domestic inflation. It's just a gentle reminder that while the basic gears of our machine remain exactly the same, their tempo and friction can definitely change based on the world around us. And finally, section 5, the path to growth. Why productivity is the ultimate engine. We've talked a lot about the bumps in the road today, the short-term cycles, the heavy long-term debts, the heat of inflation. But let's take a deep breath and zoom out to the long view. What is the ultimate engine that drives human progress forward over centuries? It's our capacity to learn. While credit and debt matter the absolute most in the short run, it is productivity, our uniquely human ability to invent, to gather knowledge, and to efficiently produce more over time that truly raises our living standards. As history shows us, this steady march of human productivity is what has pulled societies out of widespread poverty and brought us the modern world. So, how do we safely navigate this machine? There are 3 wise rules of thumb for economic success, and they apply whether you are managing your own household budget or steering a global superpower. Rule number 1, don't let your debt rise faster than your income, or the burdens will eventually crush you. Rule number 2, don't let your income rise faster than your productivity, or you'll become uncompetitive. And rule number 3, do all that you can to raise your productivity, because in the long run, that is what matters most. So, I want to leave you with this thought to ponder. Knowing now that the entire global economy is essentially just a series of simple transactions and everyday bar tabs driven by basic human nature, are you ready to look past all that intimidating jargon on the news and simply focus on raising your own productivity? Thank you for pulling up a chair for this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll see you next time.